Welcome back to New Rockstars. I'm Erik Voss, and Avengers Doomsday is reportedly wrapping production this week, and the buzz around the movie is how much of an X-Men Legacy sequel it will be. Something we all could guess from the March 26th set share announcement video, but with interesting sentiments now coming from Nightcrawler actor Alan Cumming and Cyclops actor James Marsden, it's sounding like the parts of this movie set in Universe 1005 will be the true MCU X-Men lineup that we all wish we were living with for all these years. A live-action version of the 90s X-Men the animated series, but with the live-action versions of the actors that we grew up with back in those roles. And of all of the Fox-era X-Men actors, James Marsden Cyclops was done the most dirty. As a character many readers of the comics and watchers of the animated series saw as the leader of the team, but a character who was sidelined for too many of the live-action films as producers and filmmakers instead focused their narrative attention on characters like Wolverine and Mystique. But now that Marsden is opening up about returning as Scott Summers, and D23 included a specific line from the character from the 2000 film, since Doomsday will be revisiting the X-Men universe we saw a glimpse of in the Marvel's post-credit scene, we're now coming back to the questions of when is that X-Men universe and what happened in the life of James Marsden Cyclops Scott Summers before we see him in Doomsday? What was his erased timeline? I'm gonna dig into that in this video, and if you are able to support New Rockstars to an additional degree, we do have an audio-only subscription service called NR Underground, where we do bonus podcasts covering behind-the-scenes topics here at the channel in our Danger Room series, like yesterday's episode of Zach Huddleston and me discussing what really goes into a normal workday here at New Rockstars. Take a listen.
But yeah, I think one thing you really get from journalism school like that is like you don't become sacred with your writing. You try to write something promptly, effectively, accurately, correctly fact-checked.
On deadline?
On deadline.
Yes.
And you have to do that again and again and again and again and again. And
Yes.
after 30 times of doing that and messing up sometimes, you learn how to just not be afraid of that deadline and just charge to the end of the workday and send something in. And I think that has really helped me as a content creator, just be not so precious with each thing that I'm writing, but also learning how to maximize my time as best as I can to research and then to get to the answer. And I think it's that service journalism, trying to answer questions that exist and really thinking about what the audience needs to know.
Please join the NR Underground by clicking the link in the description. Okay, at the red carpet of the Emmy Awards last weekend, James Marsden was asked by Variety's Mark Malkin about returning as Cyclops in Avengers Doomsday.
25 years later? Yeah, it's different. Well, I guess 20 years later. It's exciting. I mean, you can feel that it's something special. You can feel the world is ready for this movie and these worlds to kind of collide, and so.
Did you ever think you'd be back 20 years later?
I thought there was a chance, but I think once 10 years passed and then 20 years passed, it was like, well, that was a nice idea. But now, I guess they're just waiting for us all to get a little gray in the hair and long in the tooth to bring us back.
Yeah,
so
the MCU is the gray CU, the gray CU. Yes.
There you go. Nicely done.
Okay. I think there is something in there from Marsden about why the MCU needed these X-Men actors to be a bit older to be playing these mutants at this stage of their lives. That was also on my mind when the D23 Expo included a promo reel of iconic lines from the Marvel actors returning in Avengers Doomsday, both from the MCU and the Fox X-Men era. Like this line from Patrick Stewart as Professor Charles Xavier in 2003's X2 in the Oval Office at the end of the movie when he was referring to how Scott Summers lost Jean Grey at Alkali Lake.
There are forces in this world, both mutant and human alike, who believe that a war is coming.
And then there was this line that I think many people forgot about from James Marsden Scott Summers Cyclops in the first X-Men film in 2000.
If anything happens, I'll take care of them.
Scott was saying this to an unconscious Charles Xavier after the professor plugged into a sabotage Cerebro and the X-Men all had to step up and figure out where Magneto would be taking Rogue. At the time, I remember thinking, oh cool, the Cyclops that I know from the Fox Kids animated series is ready to step up into that leader role. But the movies that followed never gave us that. Scott spent most of X2 imprisoned with Charles and then brainwashed by Stryker's serum. Very much a passive character in the movie. His romantic relationship with Jean Grey ended when Jean sacrificed herself to hold back the floodwaters to allow the others to escape. And then in 2006's X-Men The Last Stand, when Jean returns as the resurrected Phoenix, Scott does share a moment with Phoenix and is allowed to shed his ruby quartz sunglasses, but only for a moment because then it's implied he's disintegrated and only his sunglasses are left behind. The ending of the film memorializes Scott with just a headstone. Now, reportedly, director Brett Ratner deliberately cut away from Scott at that moment of his apparent death and left behind the sunglasses in order to leave open the door for the character to return possibly someday. And co-writer of the second film, X2, Mike Dougherty, told the Slashed Filmcast After Dark podcast back in 2009 that he and Bryan Singer developed a story idea for what would have been the third X-Men film that would have opened with a more epic version of Phoenix's resurrection and a subplot that would have had Cyclops being the one to build the Danger Room, all out of guilt over the X-Men not being strong enough fighters. And then the film would have ended with Phoenix leaving Earth to become a cosmic god who tells Scott and the other X-Men, "I'll be watching." That's not really the version of the story Brett Ratner went with, obviously, but you can imagine some version of this being discussed with James Marsden at the time, and that's why he said that at some point he thought there would be a chance, maybe 10 years later or 20 years later, for his character return. The final version of The Last Stand did, however, imply that it was Scott who was supposed to be teaching the Danger Room course, but due to his grief over Jean, Logan had to substitute for him.
Hey, I'm just a sub. You got a problem? Talk to Scott.
Hey, Scott, we're looking for you downstairs. You didn't show.
What do you care?
Well, for starters, I had to cover your ass.
I didn't ask you to.
No, you didn't. The professor did. I was just passing through.
So pass through, Logan.
Now, 2009's X-Men Origins did provide some kind of backstory for Marsden's version of the character as a young mutant in Spanish class who gets detention and then is targeted by the Liev Schreiber version of Sabretooth and the Danny Huston version of Colonel Stryker. In that movie, it was that young Cyclops' optic blast that was used to form the power set of the earlier version of Deadpool, whose eyes could fire that beam even when his head was severed. Today's video is sponsored by Blue Chew. September's a time of transition. Summer's almost over, fall's almost here. As the leaves go from green to yellow and fall from a tree, it's hard not to think of your these because which is something Blue Chew can help fix. Blue Chew is the original brand offering chewable tablets for better sex. These erection-enhancing tablets help men achieve stronger, harder, and longer-lasting erections for sexual activities. It's super easy too. Just sign up at BlueChew.com, consult with one of their licensed medical providers, and once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. You can take Blue Chew anytime, day or night. That way you can plan ahead or be ready for whenever an opportunity arises. It's all done online. That means no visits to the doctor's office, no awkward conversations, and no waiting in line at the pharmacy. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA and prepared and shipped direct to your door in a discreet package. If you're skeptical or don't think you need it, try it free for a month and see. And we've got a special deal for our listeners. As always, your first month of Blue Chew is free. Just use a promo code Rockstars at checkout and pay $5 for shipping. That's it. Join Blue Chew's global mission to make better sex the dominant drive of modern society. Head to BlueChew.com for more details and safety information. Huge thanks to Blue Chew for sponsoring this revolution. But that version of history and the events of 2006's X-Men The Last Stand, and even the events of 2003's X2 X-Men United were all retconned by the events of 2014's X-Men Days of Future Past, in which Wolverine in the year 2023 goes back in time by projecting his consciousness back into his body in the year 1973 as part of a mission to alter the fate of the Sentinel program. He does succeed, and that movie ends with an epilogue that restores the timeline so that in the altered timeline, now in the year 2024, Scott Summers is alive again, meaning X-Men The Last Stand did not happen, and Jean Grey is alive again. So X2 did not happen either, or at least it didn't happen that way. Now, James Marsden interestingly did not mention his return as that cameo in the 2014 movie Here on the Red Carpet with Variety, but that's not a surprise. That cameo amounted to probably just a single day of shooting, and he didn't exactly suit up as a character the way he did for the other films. But I do think he was hoping for a more expanded role in that film, like most of his other fellow X-Men actors got. Hugh Jackman, Patrick Stewart, Ian McKellen, Halle Berry, Elliot Page, even Anna Paquin for the 2014 film got to shoot an extended sequence in the ruins of the X-Mansion that you can watch in the Rogue cut of the movie, but Bryan Singer omitted it from the Days of Future Past theatrical cut of the film. Meanwhile, James Marsden, Famke Janssen, and Kelsey Grammer only got to shoot these brief cameos in the epilogue scene. So I think that was the 10 years had passed that Marsden was referring to here. 20 years had passed, I think, would have been after the Disney buyout of the Fox film characters, and it was around this time when Marvel Studios allowed Patrick Stewart's Professor X to appear in 2022's Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness. Then the year after that, Kelsey Grammer got to come back to play Beast in the post-credit scene of The Marvels. And then after that, exactly 10 years after X-Men Days of Future Past, was 2024's Deadpool and Wolverine, when several Fox X-Men got to reappear, including Hugh Jackman's Wolverine, Aaron Stanford's Pyro, Tyler Maine's Sabretooth, and then played by other actors, mutants like Toad, Deathstrike, Azazel, Arclight, and more. Professor X and Magneto even got referenced in that movie, but not even a mention to Cyclops. But going back to that scene where Kelsey Grammer got to play Beast again, technically that is our one one glimpse of the Fox X-Men universe that Doomsday is going to take place in. I saw something weird going around where people were saying that only the post-credit scene of Thunderbolts was the only post-credit scene that mattered in the multiverse saga. Nope. Definitely the post-credit scene of the Marvels, and of course the post-credit scene of Fantastic Four First Steps. What are you talking about? But let's remember what happens in this scene.
How's our mysterious visitor?
She seems a little disoriented. What happened?
We were hoping you could tell us. All we know is that Binary found her. You somehow crossed through a tear in space-time. You are now in a reality parallel to your own, which is, of course, impossible.
You think that might be the confusion happening?
Confusion is but the first step on the journey to knowledge.
I'll take it from here.
Charles asked for an update. I'll come by and check on you later.
Yeah, Charles got a mention there, and we learned that this is a version of the X-Men who aren't that fazed by people going in and out of space. So I think it's fair for all of us to assume that the Universe 10005 that we are revisiting in Avengers Doomsday is a future that continued forth after that X-Men Days of Future Past epilogue scene. A future from the year 2024 in the timeline where now all the adult X-Men are alive and well, teaching at Charles's school, operating out of an underground base with heroes like Binary and Beast investigating multiversal anomalies, and yeah, there's probably a danger room somewhere back there. I think this universe is something like what the producers who worked on the first two X-Men films that included a young 26-year-old Kevin Feige himself for the first one, something that these guys had in mind for what the future of the franchise could look like, including a danger room built by Scott Summers and run by Cyclops to train the other X-Men, and yes, Cyclops as the team leader that he promised Professor X that he would be in that first film. So when we see Cyclops again in Avengers Doomsday, here's what I think we're gonna learn about the 5 or so years that transpired after the events of Days of Future Past. An onslaught of attacks on mutant kind coming from other threats like Sentinels that maybe didn't have the shapeshifting and power mirroring properties that they had in the original post-apocalyptic timeline of Days of Future Past, but you know, the classic bulky, chunky purple robots who are pretty good at hunting mutants nonetheless, and I'm just basing that on reports of the Doomsday set descriptions of the broken remains of a giant Sentinel robot on the lawn of the X-Mansion. But we also have to face the logical truth that even though Jean Grey seems to be alive in this universe, that one of two things must be true. The first of them is that the dormant Phoenix presence that would have been inside her from a young age is probably still there and looking for a good time and place to come out. I'll get to the second possibility later, but we should also remember that this is a version of the X-Men who have spent the last several years circling the wagons and reuniting the broken factions of mutant kind. Like Magneto is there, just as he was in Days of Future Past, but so is Rebecca Romijn's Mystique, meaning that whatever transpired between the X-Men and the first X-Men film that is still canon, they definitely worked things out with Magneto and Mystique. Also, Kurt Wagner Nightcrawler, who disappeared after X2, is now part of this lineup, meaning that rather than someone who was manipulated by Colonel Stryker in the events of X2, it's just a teleporting mutant who went to church a whole lot and ended up at the Mutant Academy. But there's the whole detail of space exploration. Yeah, this is a version of the X-Men in Universe 10005 who have gone to space. Binary, having found Monica Rambeau in the space outside Earth, tells us that the heroes of this reality treat space travel the same way the Avengers do at the point of Avengers Endgame in the 616 MCU. I only bring it up because if this is a live action version of the 90s animated series version of Cyclops, that's a big deal. The Fox era X-Men films never really went to outer space with the exception of 2019's Dark Phoenix, which was definitely set in the altered recast timeline after Days of Future Past. So if this X-Men lineup that we're seeing in Doomsday has been to space, I think it's also possible that James Marsden's Cyclops could have gone through the experiences that Cyclops' animated form did in that 90s run. Adventures to the blue area of the moon and run-ins with the Starjammer space pirates and Corsair, Christopher Summers, Scott's father. Now, we also cannot forget that Deadpool and Wolverine also retroactively makes MCU canon the events of the first two Deadpool films, the second of which includes Josh Brolin as Cable, who is technically Nathan Summers, who is the son of Scott Summers and the clone of Jean Grey known as Madeline Pryor. Remember, we saw that origin story adapted in the Goblin Queen arc of X-Men 97 in 2024. So as crazy as it sounds, if Cable even exists in the backstory of Deadpool's life, and if Marvel Studios has officially made Deadpool part of Universe 10005 and made him as important to future events of the MCU as the past Fox era X-Men films are, then Cable is part of that. And therefore, James Marsden, Scott Summers got busy with a clone of Famke Janssen, Jean Grey. And that brings me to the other possibility, to that version of her that we saw in the 2014 film's epilogue. For all we know, that Jean that Wolverine passed at the end of that film could have actually been Madeline Pryor, just with Jean Grey's memories. So, what has James Marsden's Cyclops been doing in the X-Men timeline timeline between when we saw him in Days of Future Past is ending and when we'll see him next in Doomsday, building and operating the Danger Room, leading the X-Men, fighting and wrecking Sentinels until he went gray in the hair, maybe exploring space and possibly finding his pirate dad, and making a kid with either Jean Grey or her clone Madeline Pryor to make Thanos' variant. Comment down below with your thoughts on this, and a special thanks to one of our YouTube members, Paulo Bianca, who supports us at the executive producer level. Follow me at EA Voss and subscribe to all the channels in the New Rockstars network for breakdowns and news coverage of everything you love. Thanks for watching, and a little post-credit scene of this video. Keep your eyes glued to the New Rockstars channel tomorrow morning. We're gonna have a very, very special announcement video for you that I think you'll really like. Bye-bye.